Sherry asked me to speak tonight. Just under a week ago, I actually started working with her at the Pythian Group. So I'm up here for some training. I'm actually from Northwest Florida, so I'm not from Boston, if you can't tell. But wanted to talk tonight for a little bit about database backups and recovery. I hope you weren't expecting, well, I don't know, Java SEAM programming or something. But we'll cover the basics, go through some terminology, show you some things. In fact, I'm actually going to show you one thing that is not actually available in any of the binaries that you can download from MySQL's website or from Sun's website. You actually have to build the source code on the latest version of the server. Sorry about that. To get that to work. So we'll look at that in just a minute. So, who am I? I think honestly, most importantly, I'm a MySQL community member. I'm very strongly opinionated about that. If you use MySQL on a regular basis, you're a community member, whether you like it or not. It's up to you what you do with that, okay? As I mentioned, I'm a MySQL administrator at the Pythian Group. I'm also an editor, or I'm the editor, I guess, of MySQL Magazine.
How much does that cost?
It would be free. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're actually just fixing to put out our 5th issue next month.
Very good.
I come out every 3 months. We put it out 4 times a year. And it is available at www.mysqlzine.net. I'm also a blogger at, there's my blog address at blog.paragon-cs.com. So, why do we do backups? Okay? Anybody want to guess?
Things fail.
Because things fail. I don't have my notes, so I can't, but that's a good reason.
Because we like our jobs.
Because we like our jobs. Because hard drives fail, right? When your hard drives fail on your server, it's a pretty big deal. Because users delete data, right? You've never had that experience happen? Keep doing it, it'll happen.
Essentially to restore data.
Sure, to restore data, right?
Old data.
But sometimes people don't think about some of the things that actually can happen, honestly. Data centers losing power, okay? If your data center loses power, and it happens, what's going to happen to your servers? What happens if your data center goes down for 3 days? Are you going to have some other place that's up and running? And programs run wild. Yes, that actually does happen. Just recently, about 2 months ago, we had a situation at the place that I worked at previously where we had a programmer that incorrectly coded something.
No.
No. Programmers never make mistakes. And the program did not do what it was supposed. It did what it was told to do. It didn't do what it was supposed to do. And we ended up with a bunch of junk data. Okay, it happens.
And by a bunch, you mean how many million rows?
A lot. And life happens. So that kind of covers all the things that I didn't put up there. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about some of the different backup methods, okay? Everybody heard of MySQL dump? It's probably the most common backup method. It's been around since Moses was a little kid. It works. People use it. It does the job. And we point out a couple of things, or let me point out at least one thing about MySQL dump. And we'll talk about this a bit more in a minute, but MySQL dump, when it runs, it blocks your database. Okay? Things don't work the way they should. Your queries will get backed up. And if you're running it on a production server, your users will be very upset. So that's something to keep in mind. The MyLVM backup program and the website is listed there.
It blocks only the table which you're dumping, or the...
It depends on how you have it set up. You can have it block one table at a time, or you can... Honestly, if you're using MySQL dump, and that's a great question, but if you're using MySQL dump, it makes it a lot easier if you actually just basically lock the entire database because it gives you a consistent view of your data, okay? If you're only blocking a table at a time, what you'll see is in the output from MySQL dump, as you're writing to the binary logs, right? It'll have different positions in the binary logs as it's moving through, because what it does is it locks the table, dumps the stuff. In the meantime, other things are backing up. When it unlocks, that stuff gets written off. Then it goes to lock the next table. The binary log's in a different position, right? So you don't really get a consistent view of your data. If you lock the entire database, of course, that's not a problem. Now, that really causes problems with your server, but
that also speaks to why you have to think about why you want to back up. If you're backing up for disaster recovery, you want a full, consistent snapshot, because something, because your data center exploded,
right,
or whatever. But if you're backing up because a user might delete his own profile information and you have to retrieve it, then yeah, an inconsistent MySQL dump is fine, right? Because all you need is like 3 rows from one table.
That's very true. Another program that you can use is called MyLVM Backup. It was written by Linz Grimmer. The website is listed right there. Is everybody, have you at least heard of the LVM, it's not a file system, but the LVM programs? In Linux, you have your file systems, right? Such as RiserFS or ext3 or XFS or whatever file system you may be using. The LVM system it overlays that. LVM is not a file system itself, but it controls what's going on underneath it. And one of the features of LVM, in my opinion, the real reason to use it is because it allows you to do what's called snapshots. So I can take a snapshot of my partition, whatever partition that may be, at a point in time, and then I can that snapshot remains consistent. It doesn't matter what goes on the actual partition. Okay, so it's a snapshot, a picture, think of it like that. That's really what you're doing. You're taking a picture of that partition. Okay? Linz's program uses
So
these.
you save that snapshot somewhere
Exactly.
and can download it back to get consistent state of the file system.
Exactly. So Linz's program uses LVM to take a snapshot of your data directory, right, where all your data is stored, and then it just copies off of that. That's, in a nutshell, what it does. Okay? Now, if you think about that for just a second, that is a very good way to take a consistent view of your database while not killing your users. Because in the meantime, your server continues to run. It will be a little degraded because there's overhead to this snapshot. But it's not that much. Unless you have a really loaded system, it generally doesn't cause a problem. I have seen systems, honestly though, I say that, and that's true, but I have seen systems where it will back up just because of the snapshot, at least somewhat. So until you're very familiar with your system, you need to be monitoring that while it's running, okay? A lot of places use a homebrew script. They write up something in Bash or Perl or whatever. That was actually kind of one of the things that we did at my last job. And you end up using something, maybe you do LVM snapshots yourself to do it that way. Maybe you're just calling MySQL dump from the program itself. I've seen some very simple, I've seen some really complex. It's strictly up to you and what level you need, okay? And the MySQL hot copy program, is there anybody in here besides me that actually remembers this program? People don't use it anymore.
I'm not sure I use it.
You remember it, right?
And I use it.
You do actually.
We do have a client that's all my ISIM tables.
That's why nobody uses it anymore, because the MySQL hot copy script only works with the MySim tables. Okay. So.
What is so good about it?
Well,
besides of it works only with
right.
impact.
If you only have MySim tables,
Yes.
it will actually let you do the kind of backup that the MyLVM program would do, all right, where it doesn't block your server from processing things, okay?
Not blocked.
So, unfortunately, it doesn't work with InnoDB. I'll get to the one that does in just a minute. But this one is free, and it comes with the MySQL server. It's located in the binaries directory, okay? Zamanda. I'm going to have the last two on here are going to be commercial solutions. Zamanda is probably the most popular commercial solution. They have been around for quite a while. And they actually have a fairly comprehensive backup solution. They use a combination of things. They'll use LVM snapshots. You actually can specify all this stuff. It's fairly intuitive, not too difficult to use. So for a site that has a DBA that maybe they're not super experienced and they're not going to go and write their own script or whatever, Zamanda might be a good solution. All right. The last one is IB backup or InnoDB backup, whatever it is. It's actually IB backup. But this is a commercial product that the InnoDB company, the people who make the InnoDB storage engine, use. And just like the MySQL hot copy, it will do a hot copy or a kind of an online backup of your InnoDB tables without blocking your users once again. Price-wise, I don't know what that runs.
That's
It's
600.
about 500 or 600 a
it's
server.
like 560 euro, so it's like 600-700 for
It's-
1 year, and then it's like 1,300 for perpetual license.
What about Zamanda? How expensive is that?
I have no idea, to be honest. I believe it's cheaper than the other one. I do, but it may be not. It might not be as elegant a solution either, to be honest.
It's a different solution. I mean, the InnoDB backup doesn't have like a GUI interface, and
Right.
Zamanda is a more centralized. You know, IB backup is a script that you run on one server, whereas the Zamanda is more centralized. So
The last one, if I remember my notes correctly, is really cool. One of the features that they're building into MySQL 6 is the online backup. And I'm going to walk through a sample of this here in a little bit. But once again, it doesn't block your server from processing while the backup is running. It also happens to be quite a bit faster than MySQL dump. And it is actually integrated into the server. You can be on the server command line itself and run your backup.
Just on the server.
The commands, I'm going to say offhand, I believe the command is backup and then your database. I haven't used it, so it's in my notes here, okay? I apologize, but you literally run a SQL command for backup and for restore, and you can also look at your statuses. It's pretty cool. They demonstrated this, the first time I saw this was at the conference. The people who coded the backup, the people who were on that team did a demonstration of it, and it's some really neat stuff, okay? If for no other reason, once 6 becomes stable, I actually think that that's the feature reason to upgrade.
Yeah.
Terminology, so we kind of know where we're going on here. A full backup, big surprise, you back up everything, okay? So if I were going to run a full backup of my database every night at midnight, at that point in time, I would have a copy of my database, right? And the next night when it runs, if your data set's 100 gigs, that's what your backup is, right? An incremental backup. You back up everything that has changed since the last backup, okay? So if I ran a full backup on Monday night, I ran an incremental backup on Tuesday night, it's only the differences in between the two, right? Obviously that would take up a lot less space. A logical backup, essentially a SQL statements, you can think of it like that. Quite frequently it is. Offhand, I don't know of another way to do it actually. But a MySQL dump would be a logical backup, for example. You can take a MySQL dump of a database, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but then you can open up the file and look at it with your text editor. In fact, if something goes haywire, you can go in there and edit it out or make changes or whatever. I've done that once or twice. And a raw backup would be your files and directories themselves. When I talked about taking an LVM snapshot, right, of your data partition, for example, and if I'm copying those files off for my backup, that's a raw backup.
So full backup is a kind of generic term, and those
Yes.
are more specific ones.
Well, when you're reading through terminology, the reason why I'm putting these up, when you're reading through stuff about backups, you'll see this terminology. So it's just important. They're not in, other than grouped together like full backup and incremental backup, they're not in any logical order. Okay? I don't want you to try to infer that working down through them. A hot backup is a consistent, once again, point-in-time backup of your database server while it was running. Okay? So once again, we talked about the issue of locking one table or locking your entire database. I would say that a hot backup, it really should be consistent across the entire data set. Okay? And a warm backup, the server is running but it's locked while the backup is going. This is kind of a slippery thing, and I don't want you to get too lost on this, but as you can see, it's really very close to a hot backup. Okay? I would actually say, I've seen it referred to where a warm backup, everybody's familiar with a master-slave relationship, right? So I have my master server and I have my slave server here, and my slave server is running and it's keeping track of what's running on the master, right? Well, I've seen it where they talk about a warm backup being off the slave. And I lock the slave and I do the dump. It's consistent, okay?
So when the server is down, you call it cold backup?
Cold backup. Reading my notes. The server is shut down and the files are copied off. Now, clearly, unless you have an unusual situation, this isn't something you do on production, on a production server. You may do it on your slave, okay? If I've got that master slave set up like I was just talking about. When do we do backups? Are there any CEOs, CTOs, people with C's in front of their names here? Could. It's strictly a business decision. It is. Now, I'll tell you when you should back up. You should do it as often as makes you feel safe. Okay? And honestly, to me, that's at least once a day. Okay? People who back up once a week or once a month or never, that's extremely dangerous.
Like
Well, it depends. If you have a database of movies in your home, how often you get new movies, right? It's how often you would feel.
How much data you acquire?
How much data you're willing to lose?
I deal in an environment where businesses are online and they typically, they grow at a rapid rate. Okay, I wasn't thinking about that example. You're right about that. It does depend on how much your data changes, but I talk to people all the time that don't back up their data as much as they should, and they maybe even are told to do so from upper level people. And to me, there's nothing more fundamental to being a database administrator than doing backups and recovery. Okay.
I have a customer. I did consult one time, right? I have a customer. They say they have a SCSI and a hotspot, so they don't need backup, and they have a RAID 2, something like that. So they say, why to back up? And
did you show them the planet that had the fire in the data center?
And what happened is if the whole thing down, if the power out, your host. So
or what happens if somebody screws up and drops your database? I guarantee you that RAID will not recover from that. It'll get dropped off
I
both
understand,
partitions.
and then I tell them, right, I wrote a program for them. Even I did some like sequential backup also. MySQL not support my sequential backup.
Right.
If you use MySQL DOM, you can use a where clause to do,
Sure.
stuff.
Sure. Typically, this would be daily, like I talked about. I would definitely recommend that you do this during non-peak hours and off a slave server. Okay. Your backups will normally run after midnight in most cases that I've seen. What do we back up? Anything that's important. Okay. Some examples would be your data. Duh. Okay. So let me ask you this. Did you think about the binary locks that go along with that? You never know when you might need those. And they don't take up that much space. What about your users? And your stored procedures and functions. When you do a MySQL dump, by default, I don't think it backs up your stored procedures or your functions.
Well, doesn't the tables?
You have to use -R for routines. And that
Something to
includes
think about.
triggers also.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
they're in the table essentially,
Right.
but not
Yeah.
the one which is saved. That's interesting.
Yeah, the triggers are in a .trg file.
I want to show you very briefly two different types of backups. I'm going to go ahead and go through the MySQL dump because it's kind of the traditional way of doing a backup. I'm also going to walk through the online backup in the new 6.0. You start off, so you got your dump command up there, MySQL dump, and of course you have to specify your user and your password. I'm backing up the Sequila database in this instance, and the output is going to Sequila.sql.
So you assume you are on the local host.
I am on the local host, yes, but MySQL dump can actually run on your local host, or it could run from elsewhere. Okay? A lot of people don't know that, but you don't have to do it from the local server if you have the proper permissions, I guess I should add. So after I did the dump, I actually went ahead and dropped the database and created the database, and then to get it back in is very, very simple. And once again, this is from just my normal shell. I'm just doing a MySQL, right? Specifying the Sequila database, and I'm got the input of the Sequila.sql file. Okay, so that's actually how simple. I just did a dump and a restore right there. Now, if you have a large database, that can take quite a while. On a decent system, 100 gigs will take you about 3.5 hours or so. And I would never run just a normal MySQL dump like that. I would specify, there's options, there's a lot of options. Okay, and I would refer you to the reference pages on dev.mysql.com. Okay, and go type MySQL dump in the little search thing. They have a nice reference page for that. There are a ton of options. And I actually went ahead and jumped into MySQL, changed to the database, and did a select count from the film table. So I should have shown what it was previously, but it was the same number of rows. Okay, so all my data is back. So this was a good thing. Very simple, very straightforward, like I said, which is probably one of the reasons why it's been around for as long as it has been. Now, the online backup. Once 6.0 gets into production, this will be a really cool thing. My formatting's a little off there, but it's the command, and this is from a MySQL command line, is simply backup database, the name of the database, Sequila in this case, to, and then you specify the file name, okay? Sequila-backup.sql.
And this is 6.0 only.
This is actually in 6.0.5, okay, which has not quite yet been released as community build. You can get it from the, whatever they call it,
The Bitkeeper tree?
the repository.
Bitkeeper.
The Bitkeeper. So now, one of the things that it does, you'll see down there, it's got the backup ID, which is issues, and it's a way for you to keep track of what backup is, attached to what file. By default, the Sequila backup is stored in your data directory. Okay. Now, I didn't have a chance to test it out. I don't know if you could. I assume, and I am assuming here, but you can specify a backup directory instead of just a file name.
Yeah, but there is a problem here.
Be careful that you don't
Yes.
call it Sequila.frm or table name.
No. I think you can specify either /tmp
Right.
or your data directory because you don't have a rights to write into other directories.
Well,
What you can specify any directory you have right. You can specify any
Any
directory,
where
but
you
it will
have a
get
right
an error.
permission, right?
right.
Just like if you do a T
Yeah.
on the command line.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
one why they do that in the data, because it's their property.
Now, this backup happened very fast. It only took 0.37 seconds. But if I were doing a big dump of a large database and say this took 20 minutes while it was running, if my server were online, I could go in and take a look at my show process list, right? And I would see the backup running, but everything else would be running as well. It wouldn't be blocked because of the backup. Okay? The backup status, they've got a new field in the MySQL database. All right, I don't honestly know why they didn't put this in information schema, but it's in the MySQL database itself. The table's called online backup. You just do a select star from that, and where your backup ID equals 1 in this case, because that's what it returned for you. And you can see what actually happened here. It shows that the backup is complete, that the operation was a backup, your total bytes of your backup. There's some time information there, your host name, that type of thing.
So there is a probably table where they keep that stuff,
Yes,
right?
that's the table. See where it says select asterisk from
Yeah.
MySQL.online backup? So they've added a new table to the MySQL database. And I don't mean your entire server. Okay, the MySQL database
Yeah.
historically has kept up with like your usernames and that type of thing. Okay. Now, your restore, just as simple, restore from Sequila-backup.sql. It's given a new backup ID. It took a little longer to restore, but that's pretty normal. Okay. And then once again, you can look at your restore status. So it's the same thing, but I've changed my backup ID from 1 to 2. And now we've got the same type information here. I won't go through all this, but you point out that the operation now shows restore instead of backup. Okay? Now,
Do you
before
know what it
yes,
puts
ma'am.
into the binary logs when it does that? Does it put anything in the binary logs?
I do not know.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Anyone else know? Well, I mean, it's not even, available yet, so.
What is interesting that using their time event stuff, you can do automatic backup. Just you have
using events.
using events. So that's amazingly
Sure.
convenient.
So once you start, obviously this is in 6 and 5.1, you have the events feature, so that it's essentially an internal cron job for those who are familiar with cron jobs on Unix, and you can schedule things such as this to run at scheduled times. So together it would actually make a really powerful solution. Before I go on and finish things up, the slides that I just showed you, I got from Colin Charles. He's one of the MySQL people. But anyways, he had blogged about this a few weeks ago. I didn't have access to the source code because I run Windows on my desktop or on my laptop, and so I couldn't build it. So he graciously allowed me to do that, so I needed to point that out. Disaster recovery. Okay, so we've talked about backups, we've talked about recovery, and I want to talk a minute about disaster recovery because it kind of encircles all of this. Okay? This was actually brought up a little bit earlier, but there are people who don't perform backups, and if you don't perform backups, I hope you keep your resume up to date. But please don't come ask me for a job, okay? If you're not smart enough to run backups, I don't want you to work for me, all right? Check your backups on a regular basis. How many of you do that? Good. But it's amazing how many people don't. Okay? They make a backup and they assume that everything's fine. Okay? Just recently, I started getting a new junior DBA, and one of the first things I showed him how to do, we talked about backups. I showed him how when backups are done, we get an email saying this backup is done and all of this, right? The output from MySQL dump or whatever, right? And I said, you go through there, you make sure everything's kosher, right? You make sure everything's good. And in addition to that, on a bi-weekly or every other week basis, we would go and pull a backup and do a complete restore, okay, from the server.
How do you verify the...
That's a good question. I don't have a good answer for you, to be honest.
Size of the records in the tables?
I can compare what I know.
Size means number of records, yeah.
But that's not truly accurate. I'm really looking for things like table corruption and that kind of thing, to be honest. Okay? With the facilities that are built in currently, that's just about as good as you can get. Okay? But a lot of people don't do this, and then it comes back to bite them. They go, oh, I made backups every night. And then they find out that their backups actually didn't work for the last month when their server crashed, right?
Or they use the wrong options. I once was running MySQL dump and we had a weird character set or something, and we didn't actually put the to dump with the character set. And so we didn't understand why our restores weren't working. I mean, luckily we could just go in and for every table definition change the default character set, but it's exactly. It is a whole lot easier to get it right when when the boss isn't breathing down your neck and the adrenaline isn't pumping and you're not on your fourth frappuccino.
You need that file or else.
Exactly.
You need to have a disaster recovery plan. An SOP out there stands for Standard Operating Procedure. What happens when our server dies? What do we do? How do we restore our backup? What time frame are we talking about? Right? These kinds of things. These are the things that you think about, just like she was talking about, before they actually happen. You don't wait till you have a disaster to figure out what you're going to do.
You also simulate a real disaster to make sure
I'm getting to that.
You have a fire drill.
So hold on just a second. I am getting to that. But it is important that you think through as many things as you possibly can before they happen. You can't cover everything, okay? But you can cover a lot of things, all right?
That's also a very good exercise for the C-level people because they want to be covered in every disaster plan. And that's when you get to like, okay, so if the server room blows up, we've got, a colo somewhere.
Right.
And what happens if we're in Boston and the server room's in Boston, we got a colo in New York? Well, what happens if somebody bombs the whole eastern seaboard? Okay, then they look at you like, oh, come on, now you're being ridiculous. Well, yeah, but, hurricanes happen, tornadoes happen, they could take out, 2 coastal areas or whatever, if you've got Dallas and Houston or whatever. You really do have to be careful, and you can't let, as much as you want to have your CEO think you're the best ever and you can fix anything, you don't want them to say, well, what do you mean this one place had a power outage and this other place, was back up? I thought we were covered.
Let me give you a brief example. I mentioned I'm from Northwest Florida. That sits on the Gulf Coast. And in 1998, I may be off on my years. It's been a few years. Not Katrina. Katrina didn't hit us. There was another hurricane called Ivan. Ivan rolled right through Pensacola. Okay? Let me tell you what happened. When Ivan rolled onto Pensacola Beach, which sits about 3 miles off of downtown Pensacola, it was doing about 130 miles an hour. Okay? The first time I drove out onto the island, which was actually like 5 months later, it literally looked like a war zone. Buildings, if it was a single level house, okay, it was either gone, and there was little stubs there where maybe like your stilts were, or there was maybe a couple of walls. Okay? If it were a larger building, there was a chance that there was some structure left, but over 90% of the island had to be rebuilt. Okay? When that storm hit Pensacola just a couple of miles later, it flooded the entire downtown. Okay? It was all underwater. Power was out for weeks. We didn't actually get power at our house for 6 weeks. Okay?
In Florida in summer?
Absolutely. It was not the most fun 6 weeks of my life, I assure you. If I had a business there, which I did not at the time, but if I had a business there that had database servers there, I think, well, I don't want to offend anybody, but I think the term would be SOL. Okay?
Sorta out of luck.
Yeah, that's the one. Sort of out of luck. I couldn't have moved across the street to somebody else's colo because I lost my internet connectivity. Nobody in the town had internet.
What'd you do?
You went, even Atlanta actually got hit somewhat, but you would have had to have basically gone 6 hours north to Atlanta to be able to do anything. So if my server was here and my next server, my backup server was in Mobile, which was 60 miles away, I was still probably out of luck. Okay? I would have had to have been at least 6 hours away to be safe. These are the kinds of things that you have to think about. Now, that's probably not too much of an issue here, but there are other things that happen, and I know that they have happened here, but, you know, there's other issues. Every place has... San Francisco, you got to think about earthquakes.
How did you work during this 6 weeks?
I did. It wasn't actually computer work, but yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of computer work going on there.
But a lot of it from recovery is going to be how the business, at least where I work, is like the likelihood of it happening and the cost to be worth doing.
Absolutely.
Because we've said, like, we do backups of a lot of our stuff, and our other building, which is a block and a half away,
Right.
they're like, I'm like, in my mind, that's not really off-site, but
Right.
we're in a building that loses power a lot, and the other building almost never loses power and has its own generator.
Right.
We're like, okay, this disaster, you're covered. However, if the Charles floods,
Right.
we're both screwed.
Once again, this becomes a business decision. What's the business comfortable with? Okay, and what the business may be comfortable with, I might not be comfortable with, but that's another issue. Okay? So, you need to have that disaster recovery plan. You need to know what's going to happen when disaster strikes, right? You need to outline that as much as possible. A lot of places have notebooks that they have that are step by step. Here's what's going to happen from the DBAs to the system admins to the developers or whatever, right, when these things happen. You need to practice it regularly. I think you brought that up. You absolutely need to. It's no good to have it down, written on paper, moldering away in a folder, in a file cabinet, in the back end of the CTO's office.
Or having done it once only.
Or having done it once.
You have to keep your disaster recovery
You need to be
plan.
doing this at least, I would say, on every 6 months, preferably more often than that. And that may seem like a lot of work, and it is. How important is your data? Businesses revolve around data these days, and if you lose it, you're sort of out of luck.
It's out of business.
The DR plan, and I mean, it was amazing just to go through the fire codes. We thought we had it all set, and it just exposed how many different things. We were backing up to Texas, you know, because we're planning. I mean, they're like planning on terrorist attacks or, you know, some other state street, you know, attacking and blowing them up, you know, World Trade Center. You know, I mean, it was amazing just the gaps that we discovered.
Right.
You know, just going through it, and it was a real fire.
Yeah.
You know, it was a real thing. So.
But
And
I
you
mean,
never
were you
would have known that
even
if you hadn't
panicking?
done that.
Were you even panicking?
I was frustrated and upset.
Right, but like in a
Because
real
things are not-
situation,
You're panicking, yeah.
in a real situation, add panic to that now.
I know, and you're so, because it's taking so, it was taking so long, and there's no way, the things we had to do to execute, I mean, it was like a 6-hour ordeal, it was ridiculous, you know?
So, the first time that you did that, it took 6 hours and you were frustrated, but if you continue to do it, it would get better.
Well, that's what we kept doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
See, you're ahead of the curve here. All right, you can go to sleep.
All
All right.
When I hear like, across the street, I'm thinking, what, are you crazy?
Right.
Well, there's also the idea that sometimes it might take 6 hours to recover all your
But I mean,
data.
the business, I'm kind of from my own, so
Um,
that's it.
So you definitely need to make sure that you're practicing your recovery plan. As you practice it, you will also need to revise it, okay? When you guys were running your disaster recovery plan, as you've already said, you uncovered things. I hope you took the time to update your document. I'm sure you did.
It became a bigger priority than the project we were working on, so.
That's actually pretty much it. My standard disclaimers are the views and opinions are mine and not necessarily my employees, my friends, my family, my wife, my children, and my dog, if I had one. So, I hope everybody got something out of this. We can ask questions, whatever. No other questions. I answered it all. Did I not go into enough detail? I mean, what's up here?
Let's see.
How do people do their backups now if they do them?
Can we take a quick poll? I'm just curious. For those of you who know or are involved with backups, or even if you just know what your organization does, do you use MySQL, Del?
Yeah,
Almost the entire room.
yeah.
We actually do something slightly different, which is that we replicate to a dedicated backup slave and use MySQL dump for that.
I wanted to actually bring that out, and I apologize. This is the first time I've done this presentation. I would definitely recommend, for a couple of reasons, that you run a master and slave server in your setup. Most companies do that, but not always. There's a couple of reasons. First of all, it makes it a lot easier to do your backups off your slave. You don't have to worry about these blocking issues that I talked about. And the other thing is, if your master goes belly up, it's a lot easier to bring your slave online like that, you know, within a few minutes, rather than trying to figure out what's wrong with the master, okay? MySQL is a pretty stable little beast, but it does occasionally break, I'm sorry to say.
Another thing what we do with MySQL dump, we zip it, or
Sure.
that's what,
Sure, it's very easy, and I did not do an elaborate dump example, but it's very easy to spin that off and zip it up, you know, so that it's compressed. The one thing I would say about that is if it's, and not that I wouldn't do it, but you should at least consider it. If your restore speed is of optimal, you know, importance, it does take a little bit to unzip that thing. And if it's a huge file, it could be a while.
And you can also run into corruption on
Just
zip
a
files
thought.
too, so be careful.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
So, you know, these are the things that you need to think about, you know. And I am not exaggerating. There is nothing more fundamental to being a DBA than doing backups. The rest of the stuff is fun, and I know backups and recovery is boring and, you know, whatever. There really isn't. There's nothing more fundamental than this. Because we are, as DBAs, we're responsible for the data of the company. Okay? And if you've never thought about that, ask your CEO how much that data is worth. It will blow your mind. Okay.
Try to be, try not to be like, so how much is the data worth to you? That sounds threatening.
Or it's like, how much is it worth when you don't have it?
Yeah.
You have it, and they're like, oh, well,
Well, here's a real simple question, and this goes to kind of your level of preparedness and how much money your company is willing to spend on this. If your servers are down for a day, what's it going to cost the company? And a company of any size will know the answer to that question, okay? If they've ever done any type of private investing, that is one of the questions that the investors will ask. They will determine that figure, okay? And they'll know that it's $500,000 in a day, okay, or whatever. That's how much your backups are worth,
and then
right?
you can use that number to justify the cost of the backup
I thought you
The
used that
system
number to
ain't
justify the
different.
cost of your salary. I don't
Well,
know.
no, I'm just like, if you could say it costs $500,000 a day, and
Sure.
you're putting in a $300,000 backup system, it's like, what, it's a day's losses?
Right.
Not even.
Less than a day's loss,
Right.
exactly. So then, immediate justification, we're down one
Right.
day, it was worth it.
Right.
Well, the other thing is that it also gives, you know, you have to ask how much data can we lose, and of course everybody's gonna say none. And you're gonna say no. How much data? 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Because there's always the possibility of losing some data.
Then they have
If you're a
like
financial
CE,
institution,
for
it's
continuous
always
continuous
demand.
data protection. They talk
Yeah.
about of like, I've read a little bit about it, I don't know that much.
Yeah.
Right. But I
worked
mean,
in a business-like job where we actually lost the data from like the previous 6 hours. And it was a pain in the butt. Had to like redo all my work for that day before. You know?
Well, it's just like the productivity of the time of the people whose data's been lost.
Exactly.
You know, all the finance people have to
Right.
key in all the POs
That's
over
what we had to
again.
do. It was such a pain to have to redo from memory, you know, how that works.
I hope your memory's better than mine.
right. Well, we've all had you know issues with maybe an online ordering system that lost your order or whatever. It's not the end of the world, and you
Yeah.
probably still did business with the
Yeah.
people again because you understood that sometimes things happen.
Yeah.
You know, so part of it is adjusting the attitude of we can't lose any data, we can never be down for more than 5 minutes.
Right.
You know, it's like, well, let's seriously look into it because some people do risk assessment.
So,
Yeah.
Some can't though.
Question is where to keep those backups. You cannot keep them in the same place where your database is. It's not a good idea.
I would actually recommend you keep them in at least two places.
But
I would keep
hard
them right
drives,
there
on
or
hard
the
drives,
side.
tapes, you cannot put it on CD.
If I were to draw up a plan, I would actually probably these days, and I may be going out a bit on a limb here, but I would do replication across the internet to another site.
And sometimes I would do a double back.
Okay? So you have your backup locally, plus you also have an off-site slave essentially that you can do a backup from there just as well as you can locally, right?
You don't use tape. You
I
just-
haven't used the tape in years personally. I'm just being honest. I know people still do.
Yeah, I mean, where I work, we
Yeah.
back up to our other building where a VTL sits, so it backs up as fast as it can.
I
then we send
typically
tapes
do
off,
it
so-
to like a file server type thing.
There are some,
So hard drives, essentially.
Yeah.
there are some tools, they add a little bit of complexity, but something like RDIF backup,
Right.
or duplicity will allow you to take very efficient, space-efficient
Yep.
snapshot backups through time, so we'll only essentially store the diffs between each revision. Now, that won't work if the underlying files are compressed, so if you're like doing it on MySQL dumps, you need to be uncompressed, otherwise the diffs will basically be the whole file each
Right.
time. But if you
Yeah.
use something like RDIF backup, then...
There are people that use source control repositories as their backup system.
Yeah.
Wow.
The homebrew
Yeah.
type scripts that I was talking about, that's one very popular way of doing it. We actually, that was one of the ways we did our backups at the last place I was at.
We used to store a lot of data on old optical discs
Sure.
with a big diameter, and they hold a lot of stuff. But
Well, these
You-
days, if you were to actually buy a DVD, a Blu-ray or whatever it is, burner, which I'm not completely certain is even possible, it would hold 50 gigs.
not more, yeah.
I have a lot of databases that are bigger than that.
Plus the burner for that isn't really that fast.
Yeah, it would
Yeah,
be
it's-
incredibly not.
And the
Not a
media
good
isn't going to
situation.
last 20 years.
Yeah,
although we're
it's
not
kinda-
really looking for 20
It's
years.
kind of nice to have that little optical disc to take away and put off site. That's
And
why I
lose?
say you have to have your backups in separate places. You back up locally, then you do it across the internet to one server you rent in San Francisco, right? And you dump all your backups on there too. You're covered. If my servers go belly up here, I've got my backup, it eliminates the need for that. And these days, and data is only growing faster and faster. These days, there's just so much data. At least for now, optical is just not going to keep up with it. Maybe with some of the stuff that's now in very much research phase where they have holographic, I don't know.
Well, the
storage or
solid
whatever.
state stuff.
So, essentially you're limited to hard drives
Right, yeah.
or tape. One of these high-end tape units, those things are expensive.
Yeah, LTO 4 drives are expensive, but tapes aren't. They hold like 800 gig a piece,
Yeah.
which isn't too bad.
Yeah.
But you can get a terabyte drive for almost the same cost. So you're like,
Yes, now,
tape, drive.
that's why I ask, yeah, because the price is so...
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any integration or is there any planned integration with any kind of storage array snapshot functionality? I mean, I know we have, like, we use EMC where I work, and they have some snapshot functionality at the block level in the array. And like our Oracle stuff can integrate with that because Oracle has a module that integrates with the EMC snapshots.
I'm
sure
not
there's
aware of
anything.
any. One thing that might make that possible. LVM actually would do that somewhat
Yeah.
with the snapshot functionality. But one of the things that I personally am following, and I don't, well, I guess now actually some of our, I did just change jobs a week ago, okay, so that's why I'm acting all confused. Previously, I didn't work on Solaris with MySQL, okay? I do actually now, but with
More.
Solaris, with the later versions, you have
ZFS
ZFS,
and the ZFS snapshot.
and there's talk that will get ported to Linux, and I really, really, really hope that happens, okay?
I would also say that there's hope for that. The only reason I say that there's hope that MySQL can do that and that it could probably be hacked, is because they are doing statement and row-based replication. Row-based replication is basically kind of block level
Yeah.
replication. So I kind of have to think that it's got some APIs to deal with block level differences.
Yeah. I mean, as long as if you could just halt the I/O. I mean, basically, if
Right.
it just needs a consistent state, if you could halt the I/O for a quick second while the snapshot.
Well,
it just moves the
the problem with using, and this usually doesn't cause a problem, but I have seen it cause a problem. If you're using LVM, if you're making a snapshot that way, when you take your snapshot, you've got tables open and all this stuff going on. When you restore, it essentially does a crash recovery.
Yeah.
Okay, and you can see that in the error logs. And I have had situations where it just flat won't work. Okay, I do it. I'm not necessarily. It's not my favorite thing. I would feel safer, and that's just me being conservative. But I would feel safer if I could maybe shut the server down and do a cold backup.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was reading somewhere online, somebody said they used their array and they did the automatic array once an hour, and they're like, one of these will work.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't really know if that's the best.
Well, maybe even 8 out of
There are
9
people that
of
do
them
like
will work,
RAID
but-
10 and switch out a disk every
Yeah,
now and then,
yeah.
and it's like, their servers are just that slow, and that's
Yeah,
that's
nobody
that
will
little bit
notice.
slower.
I mean, if you have to, you have to. I mean, I've done a lot of
Yeah.
sneaky things in my time to get stuff done that you had to get done, but
I would personally rather just do a cold backup off of a
Yeah.
slave myself, because you're virtually guaranteed of a clean image at that point.
Assuming your slave is in sync with your master.
Well, that's true. There's this cool little thing called show slave status.
Well, and MK table sync.
Yeah, that too. Any other questions?
Question about master and slave. Do you need to flash this log before you do the log
That's a good question. You mean on your slave?
on the master? Because you better flush the master and then whatever.
If you
on the
flush
master.
logs on the master, I mean, it'll rotate your logs on the master. I personally would probably do it on my slave.
Okay.
Your master and slave log position, they're not necessarily going to be in sync. So that's not really something you have to worry about. I would issue a flush slave on, or a flush logs on my slave before I lock the tables, essentially. Or what was the? Actually, that's now I'm speaking untruths. Hold on. I would flush. I would lock tables with read lock, and then I would actually issue the flush logs. It would rotate the logs. Then I would do the backup. That way, I've locked the tables in a consistent basis. I've flushed the logs so that I'm now in my new position. I think that's right, gosh.
Yeah, and that's why turning off the server is so much better because when it comes on, it turns on a new. It rotates the log for you, and it does, you don't have to worry about locking because it's that's one of the benefits of doing a cold backup. Because if you do a warm backup, you have to worry about this flush logs.
Right.
Because sometimes I'm confused on which one I should flush.
If you're worried about what to do, I mean, just do a show slave status and see where you are in the binary log, and then you can always just start from that position.
Right, and if you're running a dump, it will show you the position in the output also. If you're running a MySQL dump, I guess that's to say.
Anyone have a really interesting way of backing up, or?
Yeah, we went through the MySQL dump and we kind of looked at it up. For those of you who didn't answer that question, who do something else, I want to know,
right.
what do you do?
I have one sneak way to do sequential backup. Each table we do timestamp on it, so we do. When we do MySQL dump, we do use where clause to get the timestamp to get each table the set of the data. So we don't need to have a full backup. We have full backup. Every 2 weeks we have a full backup, and then every day we do sequential backup on that.
So you're essentially doing an incremental backup in
Exactly.
between.
Right. So
I've never heard of it done that way.
Actually, I did save a lot of times because where I worked before is work for the government, the airport. They have a huge data set. If we every night we do full backup is
Right.
I don't think they can afford it. So what I did is sequential backup every day.
If you have a really big data set, that's where the RDiff that he was talking about really helps, because you can do a full dump, but then it actually only makes the changes, it only copies the changes.
So when you dump, you still take time.
Yeah, well,
it take less time. to
Well,
dump.
that's true. Your dump will still take however long it will take.
Right,
You're
but my
right.
dump just only is a fraction of time.
So,
of the-
if you
I figure I got 24 hours, I can manage.
No, they just have a couple hours for backup.
If you're willing to shut down the server for a short period of time, then a file system copy will go a lot
No,
faster.
they
Yeah.
cannot allow you to shut down.
What if you have a slave running? Can you shut?
Yeah.
So you could have a
Shut down
slave, and then you
Yeah.
could use the slave to shut down the slave temporarily. Do a file system copy of that.
Okay.
And you can even do something where you have a slave running and you have another instance on the same slave. And so you have two slaves on one machine, and then you have the one slave you don't touch, but the other slave you shut down with MySQL multi. That kind of alleviates the, what do you mean you want another server that does absolutely nothing, only backups?
And you know what I say when they say that? And how much is your
How much
data
is-
worth? Anybody else? Because somebody else has to do something different. Come on.
Who uses more than one way of backing up for the same data? Nobody?
Sometimes we back up files as well as
The data files, right?
the actual data files.
Do you shut down your server when you do that, or do you take a snapshot, or do you just chance it and copy them
We
home?
shut down the server.
Okay.
Yeah. The reason I ask that question is because a lot of people do one or the other, and then you've kind of got, if you have to restore an entire, 200 gigabyte database, you don't want to sit there waiting for the MySQL dump to restore. On the other hand, if all you need to restore is one table, you don't want to have to copy a huge, 200 gig ENODB file. So again, it's kind of almost like what you're using the restore for, and because in the same company with the same data set, you might be restoring the same data in two different ways, right? Whether for disaster recovery all at once, or just a small piece of data because, the president deleted his, his contacts or something.
That's another good thing is that's a backup. You just restore just in a day or 2 days.
Now, but do you have to go to let's say it's 13 days ago was my last full backup? Do I have to go to the full days ago 13 backup and then apply all the changes until
That's
now?
multi-way. For example, every 2 weeks we have a full backup. And then if you miss a couple days, we just full backup in a couple days. So, because it's all incremental backup.
So it's an incremental, not a differential.
No, just incremental.
So it's always like the one today is from yesterday.
Right.
Exactly.
So if you need to do a if it's Thursday and you have the full, you need to restore Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and
Yes.
Thursday
Right,
to
yes.
get back to current versus
Exactly.
Thursday is not everything that's happened since the full.
This is like, I mean, the,
So you never have
the
to-
requirement for that because they want to pick a specific date backup also.
Right.
They
So you
can
never
do
have to restore more than 23 hours and 59 minutes of logs
No.
or whatever.
Unfortunately.
Well, that's
They're
good.
fine.
That's good. All right.
What's up?
One thing we do that's really unique over at WPI is we do what we call Gopher Game, where occasionally we will pull network on someone and they'll come down to our office and say, "Where's my server?" And we'll say, "Well, it caught fire, where's your backup tree?" It's a good way to get people to religiously back up, because it doesn't actually cause any harm to plug a wire down.
Oh, and then do you look like a hero because you're like, oh, I don't know, I could pull an all-nighter, but I could get your data back.
No, I leave that to my boss, I just deliver bad news.
That would be great, though, wouldn't it? You'd be like a
You keep
hero.
like a charred chassis around just in case if they want to see it.
That's a good idea.
Be like, just look at. I could have sworn it was an HP. This is an idea.
Well, that's when you like say, oh,
Happens with a kid.
I gotta lock myself in this data room, and then go out play mini golf for a couple hours, come with your boss, come back, and like, oh, you're sweating or whatever. Oh man, we were in this. They don't know the data center's full.
The data center WPI is we have horrible
Just give you
issues.
Interesting. For example, how more advanced Oracle of comparing backups?
I don't
with-
know anything about Oracle. Sorry.
Is it much more or not really?
Well, it used to be a little different because it used to be that Oracle didn't even really have online backups. But that was like Oracle 8 or something. I mean, they're in like 11 now. But it used to, like even Oracle, I think it was Oracle 8.
Really?
They have like RMAN and there's all sorts of stuff. I don't, our DBA would know, we have an Oracle guy at work, which I can ask, but
Yeah.
I don't really know that much, but he's always talking about bajillion and one things he can do with RMAN.
Yeah, one of the things about Oracle is that their replication standbys are just standbys. You can't actually use them like you can with MySQL. So when you have a replication, and they call them standbys, you can't use them like a read-only database like you can with MySQL. It's kind of like it's either replicating or you're using it and it's not replicating.
So it's the same like a master, essentially.
Well, except a master, a master can also be a slave. Whereas I don't think Oracle you can have a master and a slave at the same time. Anyone? Because you can't like log in and run a query against a standby server. It's just the point is it's a standby. It's waiting and ready.
It's not
for
actually
you.
running the database, it's kind of sitting there ready to run the database.
Yeah, it's like applying because it's they actually do I think block level stuff. So it's applying the bits to the right sectors and.
It's a kind of raw replication of MySQL, the latest replication stuff, right?
Right, but you can still have rights to the database. I mean, things are locked. Like, you can still use the database.
So if you had like a popular website, you could have a bunch of slaves that be read-only copies of stuff.
Right, and that's quite a common way to scale.
Yeah, it's just like all of these things need to beat on it. You don't need to beat on the same box, but rights, you can write when you write your code, like the writes have to go here,
Right.
but all the reads can come from here.
Right, but you'd have to use, like, Oracle Rack for that. Even though it's not rights. Even though it's not sharing rights. There's no way to do that in Oracle. As far as I know.
Interesting.
Alrighty, well, thanks for coming, Keith.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.